I'm sure we're all familiar by now the story of Otto Warmbier. He is the young man who went on a trip to the DPRK where he tried stealing a propaganda poster. Then he had bragged earlier before he left the trip that he intended on stealing something as a souvenir of his righteous anger against the DPRK for choosing not to be a client of the United States. Now, as a result, he was arrested for insulting the dignity of the country, which is a pretty ballsy thing to do when you go to a country like that that's basically at war with the country you're from, and then do something deliberately to insult them. As a result, he was prosecuted and sentenced to 13 years of hard labor. A little while later, he was found without... Essentially, his brain was deprived of oxygen, and the DPRK said that he had botulism. Then they let him go on compassionate grounds. He went home, was returned to his family, and died soon after, because essentially he was in a coma. They had claimed that he had been tortured, that essentially, yes, the government had gone in with agents and tortured him, said that his teeth were all crooked from damage and that there was cuts and broken bones and everything there, claiming that he had been tortured. As a result, they filed a lawsuit against the DPRK government asking for $1 billion in restitution. Well, that lawsuit is now over and they're getting $500 million from a judge who I'm sure absolutely did his job and did everything impartially, despite all the evidence that has come out showing that most of that was an absolute lie. Well, a DPRK-affiliated bank has been seized and $240,000 has been given to the family of Otto Warmbier, who are an already wealthy pastor's family, whose kids have a history of essentially being able to do whatever it is they want, and then being able to get away with it because their family is rich and connected. Well, this is one time Otto wasn't able to get away with doing whatever it is he wanted, simply because he was a rich kid. Now, of course, the death of this young man should be considered a tragedy, something that should not have happened. But there's more going on here than the media is willing to admit, because their focus is to demonize the DPRK. A medical examiner from the United States determined that he was not tortured. His teeth were perfectly fine. He did not have multiple broken bones or contusions or bruises as his family had alleged when he had returned. They had knowingly and maliciously lied. Now, I can understand why they would be upset, but it's another thing to go on record in court and lie. Essentially, the question here is what really killed Otto Warmbier? What we did see was that he didn't have botulism as the DPRK claimed, but he did die from a lack of oxygen to the brain. The torture story isn't real. The botulism story isn't real. So what really did happen? Now, the investigation that I did, taking the available evidence and trying to extrapolate what happened, I believe Otto attempted to commit suicide, or now would be successful given his current state. I believe that coming from a rich, wealthy family who relatively got to live without the consequences of their actions, and because from being a pastor's family, being holier than thou, and all kinds of privilege, if that's the term you want to use, was sentenced to 13 years of hard labor. And I believe in the end, this was something that he mentally could not accept, given the drastic change in life from such privilege to hard labor in a third world country. I believe he attempted to hang himself. And the DPRK made a mistake by not keeping an adequate eye on him. And rather than admit culpability for not properly placing him under enough watch to prevent this from happening, they said he got botulism. And the hanging, which is usually how suicides are carried out in prison, is an adequate and reasonable reason for a lack of oxygen to his brain. And I believe that's what really happened. The DPRK lied in order to cover up their own culpability in this, failing to keep an adequate watch. His parents and the United States government lied about torture in order to demonize the DPRK because the two countries are still technically at war. And I believe that's what really happened in this case. And I think that the judge in this case, while claiming, essentially giving restitution for a crime that didn't commit, that the DPRK did not commit, could have gone up after what the DPRK was responsible for, and that the prison should have been monitoring him more closely. But it's so typical that the DPRK should have to pay for the life of one American, while the United States is responsible for the deaths of, 10 million Koreans? And give no restitution to the people that they've murdered? Or the people that continue to die because of U.S. sanctions against the DPRK? But we're supposed to have this gigantic moral outrage for the death of one young man, when untold numbers of children have been murdered by U.S. sanctions in the DPRK. And the continuous difficulties that they have to go through every day because of the U.S.'s choice of actions. The moral outrage displayed over the death of Otto Warmbier is nothing more than gigantic hypocrisy. That while his death is a tragedy and something that shouldn't have happened, a much greater crime has been happening for decades that has gone completely ignored by the same people who show that tremendous outrage. And I think that's the angle here that the mainstream media does not want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the crimes that the U.S. empire has committed inside the country. They only want to talk about anything that they can use to demonize the DPRK in order to justify to the U.S. population the murderous policy that the U.S. government has towards the DPRK for its simple crime of not wanting to be a U.S. client state. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.